Welcome to Teaching Artist Podcast, a show dedicated to discussions of teaching art to kids, making art, and how those things overlap and feed each other. I'm Rebecca Potts, your host, a visual arts teaching artist.
Before we dive into this week's episode, I just wanted to say thank you to the artists who submitted work to our spring show at Play Plus Inspire Gallery. Maria and I had such a hard time selecting work for the show because we were so impressed with so much of the work. We are a bit behind in getting feedback out to artists, but we're working on it, I promise. We wanted to share thoughtful feedback with every artist, so we've been taking our time to do that while we both also continue to juggle our own teaching jobs, parenting, and our art practices. We're also pulling together the show to open April 23rd. We'll be sharing more very soon, so stay tuned. I also wanted to share that I was on another podcast sharing a bit of the behind the scenes here. Meredith Reed interviewed me on Asa Lounge Live about starting this podcast. It's a short and sweet conversation that you can catch wherever you get your podcasts or see on Instagram Live at Asa Collective, and that's OSSA Collective. Each week, I'm sharing a featured artist as well as a guest interview. I'll share a bit about the featured artist here, as well as sharing images of their work on Instagram and on the website. Our featured artist this week is Labdi Shah. Labdi is an artist based in Ahmedabad, India. Trained as an economist, clinical psychologist, and art therapist, she is a self-taught artist. She specializes in finger-painted artworks created from intuition without any reference or pre-sketch, distilling the purest expression of her emotion into her art. Art seeks to convey the truth of the human experience in all its complexity. Her effort as an artist is to share the faith she has in the capacity of love and to accept the uniqueness of every human being, irrespective of race, color, gender, and culture. She works with a variety of media, including watercolor, acrylic, charcoal, and ink, and enjoys the uniqueness of each medium. Her work has been featured in art publications around the world, including Curious Publishing, Detester Magazine, Porridge Magazine, Postscript Magazine, and Copper Magazine. Her recent participatory art installation on the theme of love, titled Rainbow of Emotions, was featured at the Abhivakti Art Festival in 2020. Her work was on view at the recent virtual exhibition Collective Impact, hosted by Ikui in Atlanta, Georgia, at virtual exhibitions hosted by Las Laguna Gallery, Student Art Spaces, and again by Ikui. Her work was also in Hope Revolution at Stay Home Gallery in Paris, Tennessee. Her passions include traveling and studying human complexity. From Labdi's artist statement, she says, witnessing change during this pandemic has been as commonplace as breathing. What we had taken for granted as an integral part of our lives has been overturned. This pandemic has brought about a shift in a mindset of every single individual and made them look inwards to seek change and collectively work to create a space which is fruitful, not just for them, but for others also. I am not coping with change, but for the very first time, I have started walking with change, as somebody would walk with their shadows. I have begun to see that it is not different from oneself, but a very crucial part of oneself, without which one's reflection would not be visible. During this period, the way I sought to bring about change was by working on my own self and my own insecurities with full honesty, to emerge as a butterfly from the cocoon and share that joy through my art, the only way that I could tell the truth about how I felt. I believe that anything shared truthfully has the power to touch another person's heart. Beautiful. And she also says about the specific work that we are sharing, I wanted to express my mental state in this pandemic through my work. Coincidentally, the day I painted this, my partner was reading to me an essay by James Baldwin about the creative process of an artist, which talked about the state of aloneness that an artist must cultivate. With this work of mine, I wanted to convey that isolation is neither dark nor lonely. There is reality, which I accept, that the pandemic has created a dark hole, but the color of your spirit can never fade when you are at your most natural and true form. And you can see more of her work on Instagram at gallery.lab26. And we will also be sharing on our Instagram and on our website at teachingartistpodcast.com. And if you would like to be featured, you can submit your work at teachingartistpodcast.com/opportunities. Judy Richardson is a sculptor living and working in the high desert mountains of Magdalena, New Mexico, recently transplanted from Brooklyn, New York. Her work is assembled and cobbled together with many dissimilar materials and inspired by many different sources, from the political to the personal. She is a former scenic artist for the San Francisco Opera, which had an enormous effect on her work. Judy's work was included in the Spring Break Art Fair in New York this past spring. For many years, she showed her work with Ivan Karp at OK Harris Works of Art in New York. She is a 2013 recipient of the Pollock Krasner Foundation Grant and has had a number of artist residencies, from Roswell, New Mexico to the Vermont Studio Center, to the Dune Shack of Cape Cod, to Cochabamba, Bolivia, to Mesa Verde, Colorado. Judy is paying a lot of attention to the wind, the grass, and the bosque these days, making work that reflects their forces. Judy talked about her work in scenic design before getting into teaching. She shared how teaching began as a necessity, a job that would allow her to bring her daughter and fit in with being a single parent. It was so helpful to hear about her experiences in New York and how she's built relationships with curators, gallerists, and fellow artists over many years. We talk on this podcast a lot about building relationships with our students, but the same idea applies to all of the relationships in our lives. I love seeing how Judy's work has changed as her location changes, and hearing about her process of selecting and handling materials. She talked about the way the materials drive her work and the meanings they hold. In talking about her shift from New York to New Mexico, in her artist statement, she says, "In the city, I made my work from discarded materials that I transformed into objects or installations about emotional and political situations. It was all about people and their stuff. Here, in the high desert mountains, humans are a minor component. Now I'm working on pieces about forces like grass, wind, survival with very little water, and a land that used to be the bottom of the ocean floor. Dramatic geology lessons present themselves to me every day in person. My discarded materials have become bark, wood, reeds, plants, and birds that couldn't fly. I still believe in the wonders of the everyday and the importance of learning about the structures and systems of things right around me. In making work, I adhere to the mark of the human hand and the beauty of human error." I love that. Okay, let's hear from Judy. I am speaking with Judy Richardson today, and I always like to start just with your background. Could you share your journey with us? How did you become an artist? And then also, how did you get into teaching?
Well, I was always an artist. I always loved making things from the time I was a little kid. But when I went to college, I thought, oh, I can't do that. I'm not going to make any money, so I'll go do something more practical. I wasn't really sure what. So I went to NYU my first year of college. It was totally the wrong place for me. And I had a printmaking teacher who at one point said, "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in art school, aren't you?" I was like, "Oh, yeah. Oh." So I left there after a year and I went to Kansas City Art Institute, which is a fantastic school.
Mm.
I wound up in sculpture, and I was also thinking, oh, do something practical, be, a weaver or something. And I spent just a few weeks in the fiber department. I thought, oh no, this isn't it. So I went into sculpture, and it's got a famous sculpture department, a really strong, crazy work ethic. Like if you weren't there from 8 in the morning until midnight, the chairperson would not speak to you. So that gave me a lot of experience in making all kinds of things. So when I got out of there, a bunch of us moved to Houston. It was supposed to be a good place for artists at that time, a lot of money for public art. That was a bad place for me too, but I got a job working in a scenery shop, building scenery for Miami Grand Opera and Houston Opera.
Wow.
And then I learned a lot more about how to make things, and I was a good welder. So even though I was a terrible carpenter, they kept me because I was a good welder. And I didn't go back to school for years. I wound up working for the San Francisco Opera, making scenery for them. I worked in a shop that did a lot of rock and roll shows south of San Francisco. I worked on a bunch of commercials and movies. I built the peaches for James the Giant Peach. I don't know if you saw that movie, but
wow.
I made those. And at any rate, everything was cool about that until I became a single parent. And then it was just not the wrong job because it was too many hours away from my little daughter. So that's when I started teaching. I invented a job where I could bring her. I invented an after-school art program at her school. I had no teaching experience at all. But when I was on unemployment from the movie, I went into her elementary school as a volunteer, and I did art projects with all the different grades just to sort of learn something about how to do it. And then I thought, well, what do they need here? And they had the one really bad after-school program, and all the kids hated it. And it was really just a way for the teachers to make some extra money. So I thought, well, they need something more fun than this. So I proposed an after-school art program to the principal, and he was a fantastic principal. He goes, yeah, sure, that sounds good. Yeah, just go find a nonprofit sponsor and we'll let you do it. So that's when I started teaching. I brought her with me as my little assistant. At that time, she was in 4th grade and she worked with me.
Amazing. Yeah, I love that, creating that sort of out of necessity and also seeing a need at her school.
Totally. And the kids loved it. And I had the same kids year after year, semester after semester. I had the same kids from 1st grade all the way through their 5th, or I think at the time it ended in 6th grade and then it ended at 5th. And then I said, I didn't want littler kids, but I had somebody hit me up like, could you think my daughter could come because her older sister's in your program? I said, well, okay, we'll try it. And then I let kindergartners start coming if they had a sibling, because the sibling kind of looked after them. Like I didn't want to have to be, the mommy too much. I wanted kids who were artists, and they were, and they just got better and better they came to my program for years.
Amazing.
Yeah, I did that. And then one of the parents of one of the students decided that it would be good to start a program in the school that would have a few different fun classes, based on my model. And so she started this little, school-wide after-school program like science and cooking, something and something, a couple little things. And then the school decided that was such a good idea that they would start a much bigger program like that. And they hired me to be the director of it since I had that track record. I offered over 50 different classes a week after school it was 250 families were participating in it. And it was a tuition-based program, but it was so inexpensive. It was less than hiring a babysitter for your kids. So that was a really great program because the teachers in the school all wanted to work in it because then they got to teach things that they never had time to do during the day. Whatever their love was, they didn't have time to do that during their normal teaching day. And then any classes I wanted to have where nobody knew how to do that in the staff, I hired teaching artists to come in and do, African dance and some special stuff that the teachers didn't have experience with. So that's really how I met teaching artists and understood what that was. I was hiring them. And the program was like super successful and everybody completely loved it. It was mainly that because the school was in downtown Brooklyn, public school, a lot of the parents were single mothers who worked in the city government, which was close by. So they put their kids in that school so they would be near them during the day. They wouldn't be like way out in their neighborhood somewhere. So
Yeah.
those parents had no choice but to put their kids in after school.
Mhm.
There were kids in that neighborhood who had like their piano lessons and their ballet lessons, and then they'd come to the school after school for the special science class or the special comic book making class. But most of our target audience were parents who had absolutely no choice about picking their kids up anytime before 6 o'clock.
Right.
So that's who we targeted the program for. We got rid of all the materials fees. Like, no, just incorporate everything so that it was, same price across the board for everybody. So it
Mhm.
wasn't like kids who could afford the better class. It wasn't like that. We stopped doing that. That was how they originally started, but I said no. So
Mm.
anyway, it was a really fantastic program, and it lasted for about 4 years. And a new principal came in, and very unfortunate circumstances shut it down because she realized that the program was more popular than she was. So
Uh,
she shut it down. And anyway, that's when I became a teaching artist. I'm like, well, I don't have that job anymore. I
mm.
had some college teaching gigs, but that's when I started being a teaching artist myself, because then I knew all those people and the companies they worked for.
Right. So at the same time, you were starting to adjunct for some of the colleges, and then you were also teaching for several of the organizations in New York.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I had been working as an adjunct before that during my own
Mhm.
after school program, but then I just had to, I had to do something. So I was always a practicing artist and had my
Mhm.
studio practice going and had a lot of good luck, some bad luck, but a pretty good run. I'm still doing that. But yeah, I just had to make money somehow and had to do it in jobs where it wasn't going to have a big impact on my parenting, since I was the only parent.
Right. Yeah. And then I'm curious, I want to get into your artwork, but I would love to hear about that, just how you were kind of fitting all of that together. I know
Oh, giant juggling act, Rebecca, you know how it is.
I do. I just want to hear you tell us.
Well, in one case, I have very close friends. They are living in Pasadena now, but they were in a nearby neighborhood in Brooklyn. So I had a couple days a week, I was going back and forth to SUNY New Paltz, the State University of New York in New Paltz, which was a 2.5 hour each way drive from Brooklyn where I was living. So in one day, I would drive for 5 hours and teach for six.
Ugh.
And so I could never get back in time for making dinner for my daughter. So I had these wonderful friends, and she would walk over to their house after school. They'd have dinner for her. That was for 3.5 years, twice a week. They
Mm,
did that for her because she was a little kid, and I wasn't going to be home. So I would just go pick her up once I got home at 8 o'clock at night.
mm,
And that went on for those years. And in between those college gigs, I was doing the after school program, and I would go to my studio. I had a studio in Williamsburg, Brooklyn at the time. It was a really, really dangerous and cheap, great studio space, but
mm.
definitely not anything like how it is now.
Yeah.
And that's the place I'd ride my bike over there in the morning after she went to school, and I'd work until the early afternoon and come back in time for the after school program on the days when I wasn't teaching college. So, just worked it out, just had to.
Yeah.
The studio was my mental survival. Otherwise, I was going to go nuts.
Yeah. And I know just from my experience and talking to other teaching artists that really piece together all these different jobs, the travel in between can be so wild, just taking so much time.
Oh, I know. I was a bike commuter, and
Uh,
I did that in New York City for almost 20 years, going back to, because teaching artists understand that the hourly wage is great, but it's very unusual to get enough hours at one place.
mhm,
I was going to like 2 or 3 schools a day and riding my bike
mhm.
to all of them in between. It was it was a battleground out there.
Oh.
Yeah, but I'm very happy I'm not doing that now. But I have to say, I'm sure the teaching artists listening understand this. Some of the gigs were really, really great, and some of them were just awful.
Mm,
The ones that were great were wonderful, and the ones that were bad were just like, oh yeah.
mm,
I'm sure that everybody listening understands that. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, any problems were never with the kids, or very, very
mhm.
rarely with the kids. It was always the politics. Somebody signed a contract for me to come in, but it usually wasn't the teachers.
Yeah. And then I know when I was working with it was Brooklyn Arts Council that always had a planning meeting with whatever teachers were going to be participating. So there would be that kind of setup where the teaching artists, the teachers, the principal, and like the nonprofit manager all kind of sit down together and talk through what this program is.
It's supposed to be like that, Rebecca, but it wasn't always like
Yeah.
that. And Brooklyn Arts Council, by the way, was my first nonprofit sponsor when I did my own after.
Oh,
They were the first ones who
amazing.
said, yeah, sure, we'll do it. Lorraine, somebody, she had big false eyelashes, I remember. But anyway, yeah, they were the first. But that is true. That meeting is supposed to happen for each gig, but it did not always happen.
Yeah.
And then I'd show up and be like, oh no, you're here. You're going to make a mess in my room, aren't you? Now you want storage space? Well, I don't have any. And there was like this kind of hostile thing where you had to kind of work it to wind up establishing some kind of relationship with the teacher just to make the residency go better.
Yeah. So I was there. I was at Brooklyn Arts Council as a program manager and then started teaching like one day a week. I was teaching just a little bit there. Yeah. And I definitely saw times where, we would have that meeting and everybody would say hello. Okay, we sign off. But then just being on top of any of those issues, like if, the teaching artist comes in and she's like, yeah, I met you, remember we talked about this?
Yeah. Yeah, we had this one school just a couple years back. Oh, it was really, really rough. We're supposed to have this second grade teacher is supposed to be with us. It was an after school residency for second graders. And the teacher is supposed to be with us. And she looks in the room. We never had a meeting with her, nothing. She peeks in the room. She sees we've got all these big canvases laid out and all kinds of paint and stuff for the kids. She has worn this beautiful leather suit to school, like a leather suit, right? The jacket and the pants that match. Obviously really expensive clothes. And she peeks in the room and that's it. That's the last time we saw her. She never showed up. We're supposed to be with her because we're not certified teachers and she never showed up.
Yeah, she noped right out of there.
Yeah, no,
she was like,
no, my clothes are going to be wrecked.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But, on the other hand, I did have I had a couple of teachers working with me who were so wonderful and just like dream. I came into one school and it was a school only for the sixth grade. The whole other building was for everybody K through 5. And then they had a separate building only for sixth grade. The woman in charge of that building was amazing. And I came in to do, I had the city project that I did a lot of schools where we did a big floor map of the city, like an aerial view. And then they built little buildings to go on the city and they loved it. It was a long-term project. So I had this one teacher, was a great teacher. And I came in to do that. And she goes, listen, we're working on westward expansion. Do you think instead of doing contemporary city, could you do it like a settlement village with my kids? And I think, yeah, sure. And she was one of those teachers who really wanted to do art in her room, but she never had time and she didn't have the materials. And she tried to do a couple little things. She really wanted it. And that's the perfect situation for a teaching artist when they understand that that's what they need to do and want to do, but they just can't do it. And they need somebody to come in and facilitate that. And she was one of the best people I worked with. She really appreciated that experience for her kids because it helped them, learn the subject better. She was a fantastic experience. And then in one school, I was hired to come in and this was a special needs class. It was only about 12 kids. And I worked the entire year with that class. And the teacher was a wonderful ex-Marine. So like very strict, but very kind with her children. And she and I sat down at just a meeting between the two of us. And she went through her whole textbook, every chapter, and said, I've always wanted to do something like this. Do you think we could do something like with Indian jewelry? Or do you think we could do something with African masks? And she just kind of laid out her list of dreams that she always wanted to do but couldn't do. And then I came up with projects for them. And that was a great experience because the kids loved it. I loved it. She was great. There were paras in the room, so like a lot of adults. And those were the kids who, they might have had a lot of struggle with reading or math, but they understood how to do an art process. They got it immediately. And then like flew with it and were so good at it. It gave them a lot of confidence, I think, to, for their other subjects they were trying to learn.
Yeah. And I feel like I've heard that again and again, and I've seen it too, where kids that maybe don't have other places where they can shine,
Yes.
having that opportunity to shine in the arts is transformative.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And did you ever bring your own artwork into the classroom? Like, did you share your art making with students?
I shared techniques, especially
Mhm.
techniques I learned like working on scenery, for the opera and rock and roll. I shared a lot of stuff like that. My own artwork, no, I didn't want to do that, but I
Mhm.
definitely tried to come up with projects that I just thought would be fun and interesting. I did like pen and ink, ancient map making with kids.
Mm.
You know what I brought into the classroom? Not so much my own studio practice, but a lot of I was teaching art history in college, and I brought in a
Mhm.
lot of projects based on those kind of things to the kids in school because I thought, like cave painting, making Paleolithic era small
Mm.
objects, carving things, that kind of stuff. A lot. I've in my own practice, I have a real strong love of materials and
Mm.
techniques, and then I
Yes.
apply those to whatever my concept is. So that is what I brought in, not my own artwork, but my own
Mhm.
ideas about materials that are fun to use and techniques that are fun to use for what they wanted to learn. And at one point,
Mhm.
I was compelled by the work of the Bread and Puppet Theater, the people in Vermont.
Mhm.
And, they're always the first part of the Halloween parade through Greenwich Village in New York every year. So I went and volunteered to be in one of their shows so that I could learn the way they did their stuff. They always rented a theater in New York for part of a year every year. And I went and was an extra in one of their shows so I could see what they did. And then I brought that into a classroom. And oh my God, that was such a fun project. The kids were sixth graders in a middle school out in East New York, and they were studying Greek mythology. So I said, we're going to make these giant puppets as the gods and goddesses for your Greek mythology chapter. So we did it like the way the Bread and Puppet Theater did. But these kids, so sixth grade, right?
Yeah.
They all made these puppets like their alter egos. And it
Ah.
was hilarious, like big boobs on them and the big eyelashes and all the things their mothers would never let them do to themselves. They did it to these puppets. Rock and roll guy, one god puppet had a guitar so he could play rock and roll and electric guitar. It's just like, whoa, they just like let it rip with that one. It was
Oh,
hilarious.
that's amazing.
And we had these giant puppets that they were like having to move up and down stairs to go to some storage closet every time I was done with that lesson.
Oh, I love that.
That was one of the funniest.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then do you feel like your teaching influenced your art making at all? Did it, I don't know, did it come into your studio practice or were they kind of separate?
Not really my teaching. It was more
Mhm.
like I was saying, like a lot of subjects in art history that I used in my teaching were things that
Mhm.
influenced my own work too. So it wasn't so much
Mhm.
it was, I guess, because of my teaching that I was needing to research those kind of subjects, especially art
Mm.
historical stuff. That has come into my own work a lot, but not so much not so much like my experience in the classroom, more my experience with research.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And would you want to share a little more about your work? Maybe to start visually, could you describe it? And I will point to your website and share some of your work so people can see it.
Oh, thank you, because I just redid my website. Oh, good.
Yay!
I'm glad the page of recent work has I've moved to a little tiny village in the mountains of central New Mexico now. And so when I moved to New York, I didn't want to live there, but I had to go there for family
Mm.
circumstances. And I went looking for materials there and I couldn't find you can't go to scrap yards there.
Mm.
It's, there's like a mountain of stuff with a backhoe and a Doberman pinscher. And, you can't go into these. I had always shopped in places like that when I lived in California, when I lived in Kansas City and Texas. That's where I shopped for materials or demolition yards. And in New York, you can't go there. They don't want the liability of people walking into those places. So I started picking up stuff off. I had no money and, like I told you, very little time to work on
Mhm.
stuff. So I started picking stuff up off the street and dismantling it and using that as my raw materials. And I that became my aesthetic for years when I lived in the city. So it wasn't figurative work, but it was about, it referred to people and their things. It was not figurative, but it referred to people and the stuff that they wore, or they sat in, where they slept. But here in the high desert mountains, I'm living in a place where people are a very minor component of this, of anything. And so I've gone out right around where I live, and I just started picking up, parts of the plants and the things that are around me. And that's the work that I'm doing now. And I feel excited about it and happy about it. I'm not exactly sure where I'm going with it, but these, in terms of discarded materials, it's not about, I don't want to get into this like rusty metal stuff that's all over no, that's not, I want my work to reflect the feeling of the place I'm in. That's really important to me. And that's been my motivation, where my ideas have come from all along. And that's what I'm trying to bring to the new work. So if you go to the recent page of my website, that's the work. That's the stuff that I'm working on now. And that's really important to me. So in the city, it was a lot about people and their stuff and, political situations and just emotional situations that I was in. And now it's really, I just want it to be a reflection of being in this kind of really a wild place where nature is predominant.
Yeah, you can see that change, that shift to more natural materials, looking at your work.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So that was my purpose. And, and then sometimes I had a residency in Bolivia a couple summers back. So I was there for a few months. And, it was very amazing, ancient, and very enigmatic culture. They're really the Incas, except now everybody's got a phone, but they live still like the Incas did. And the women particularly were complete mystery to me. I did some teaching workshops. I put myself into a situation in a little mountain town where there was a weaving cooperative, and I wound up doing some teaching workshops with the women there. And I couldn't understand what was going on with the women, and I really couldn't make any work about being there until about a year later. I didn't want to make work that was kind of trite or just, like first impression or cliche, but there were these big, strong, tough women all over, in public a lot in the marketplace. And then it turned out they just had like zero autonomy at all, because whatever money they made, they handed over to the men in the family. And then like I was teaching these older women, they all had like 8 kids. They didn't want to have them, but they knew about birth control, but they couldn't afford it. So it was like now they were older, and the weaving they were doing and the drawing workshops I did with them and the puppet making workshops I did, that was like the only time they got to have any fun at all. The rest of their lives was like hauling laundry back and forth to the river, and just like, just grunt work was their day. And so their art making was, anyway, I made this piece called Pollera that is on that page about my experience there. But it took a long time to kind of process just what it was like there, or what was going on with them. So I think, when it comes to making art, it's important to give yourself enough time to really don't rush, just let it kind of sink in. And then when you really need to make the work, that's when you make it, not just for the heck of making something. That's, you and I both know that in terms of the time we have for our own work. Just, you don't make work until you need to. And then that work is the good work.
Yeah. And then it just flows out.
Yeah. Yeah. It flows out. And if you get to a point where you're stuck and you don't know what to do next, don't do anything. Like have a couple things going at the same time. So you never feel like it's not like a job where you just have to finish it. No, wait, wait, it'll come to you.
Yeah.
And you're not going to mess something up.
And do you sketch or journal, or like I think of with sculpture, I think almost of especially sculpture with, almost like this assemblage of all these different materials. Do you ever kind of play with the materials before really attaching them as a form of sketching?
I only, I have to tell you something. Yeah. I really believe in drawing. I have a strong belief in that drawing is important, but I have a hard time doing it myself. I have to make myself, like the times I've done the most drawings is when I'm in a situation where I do not have a studio to work in to build anything or to make my sculpture. And then I need to draw because I I need to be working on something, and I like to go out with, I use crayons, I use those China markers a lot, and I'll go draw the landscape from observation. I really love doing that. But when I have a studio to work in, I feel like it's hard for me to settle down. I like my work in my studio because it's very physical, and it's hard for me to settle down and concentrate on drawing, even though I am teaching drawing in college, and I do believe in it. So right now, the only time I do draw, if I get into a problem and I can't figure out what I want to do, something's not working. So then I start drawing out how to solve the problem. I don't draw in the beginning because I usually have an idea in my head, and I try not to make it a really distinct idea. I have an idea and a feeling that I want to communicate, and I start working with the materials, and I play a lot. Assemblage is correct. That's what I'm doing. And I play a lot with putting things together and laying them out and leaving them for a while and looking at them and thinking about some other thing and using some other thing. And so one of the hardest things I'm dealing with now is, I lived in New York almost 30 years, and then I moved and I got rid of a lot of my collections of just stuff. And so now I'm like, oh, I know that would be just perfect, but oh no, I don't have that anymore. Oh shoot. So, I'm sort of trying to, anyway, I don't have, I had lots of stuff I had collected that I used as my source materials, but okay, all right, you can't move everything. I moved across the country. You can't bring it all. So I didn't. And so some of that is, that's okay. I felt like, okay, just think differently about the work, collecting other kinds of stuff. You're in a different place now. It's not going to be the same thing. So anyway, drawing, back to your question, drawing is something I've used now just to sort of work out some problems with my sculpture, but I don't start with a drawing, and I don't know how painters do it. For all you painters out there, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you start with a blank space and create space from that. I'm so in awe of what you do, because I feel like the materials I choose to use kind of help me tell me what to do, And when you start with nothing, I don't know how you do it. I'm amazed.
I feel like that sort of awe and, looking at how someone else works and being sort of in awe of what they're doing goes both ways, though. I look at sculptors and I'm like, how do you come up with these forms and kind of put things together this way?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But anyway, just a shout out to all you painters, wow.
Yes, absolutely. And then I also totally relate to that, necessity is the mother of invention.
It is. And honestly, to tell you the truth, it's really true. I had a teacher way back in Kansas City, and I remember seeing Joan Livingston. She's a wonderful fiber artist who makes stuff out of felt. And I said something to her well, I don't know. I guess I'm going to do this next. And she goes, you guess you're going to. If you don't know why you're doing it, then don't bother, because what, you have a lot of extra time? No, only be working on things that you really feel strongly about, because otherwise go do something else.
Yeah, I totally feel that.
Yeah, especially with the juggling act that most teaching artists are doing with, family and job and studio practice. No, come on, it's not just for the heck of it. I have to say the work I did when my daughter was little, I had almost no time. I was completely broke. I was struggling with all kinds of things. And I think that's some of the best work I've ever done. I just had to do it. I had to do it to just keep myself okay. Yeah. And that work was some really strong work that I showed. I showed my work with Ivan Karp at OK Harris for years, and, felt really lucky that he was such a big supporter of mine.
How did that relationship or other kind of relationships with galleries come about? How do you nurture those? And really the question is, what advice would you have about working with galleries and curators?
Well, here's some things I've learned that I have found extremely valuable, and I only really learned them recently. Well, Ivan, he is a historical figure in New York, and at the time he would look at slides. Anybody could send him slides, and he would consider them. And it's even now very, very rare, because he didn't have to know of you or hear of you or anything. If he liked the work, he came over. Luckily, a friend had told me his studio visit is going to be 2 minutes long. Okay, don't worry about it. It's going to be 2 minutes long. And it was 2 minutes long. He'd been in business for a really long time. And he walked around for 2 minutes and said, I'm going to give you a show in October. It's okay. Wow. He just knew whether he felt strongly about the work or not. But what I've learned that I think would be valuable to other people is I wound up showing in a gallery in the Lower East Side for the last few years before I moved away from New York, and I became friendly with the owner there. And she said to me, listen, I have this business and I have openings and I have shows up, and I expect people to be part of my community. I want people who are going to come over and look at the work and come to the openings and hang out. And then when they come and ask me to look at their work and consider it, I want to. But when people come in off the street who've just read about my gallery, I've never met them and they've never been part of my community, and they want me to look at their work, I kind of feel like, why should I? And that made a big impression on me. And I thought, I think that's how a lot of people in the art business feel like you need to show up and to show that you're interested in the work that they're showing and you're interested in them and their community that they've created. And then they're going to be more willing to consider your work after you kind of established a track record with them.
Yeah.
And so, having moved to a new place, I started doing that when I first moved November 2019, and then everything shut down because of, actually went back to New York February last year. I was in one of the big art fairs in New York, which was like the last thing that ever happened. Before, like the day I got back is when they started shutting everything down. And it was just a really incredibly lucky. There were thousands of people at the art fair, nobody wearing a mask. Nobody knew about anything, no really big awareness of COVID in the United States. And then anyway, so that it was a great experience to be in that art fair, but I had started to try and build up visiting galleries in Albuquerque and Santa Fe for myself here. And then everything shut down, but I've started it up again. And I do have a couple pieces about to be in a show in Albuquerque. And I really took that advice of my friend in the Lower East Side to heart. And I've, gone to now that things are starting to be, there's an outside space, just establish a relationship with the people before you ask them to look at your work. Just show up, when you can show up, right, be on Facebook with them, go to their openings if it's virtual or in person, and understand what kind of work they're showing and whether your work fits into that space, whether it's going to be appropriate for that place. It's not for, everybody's work is like, there's a certain couple of places that it might be good. It's not for every place.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I know it's something I've struggled with. I feel like it's almost easier now that, it used to be that all the openings, even though I'm like a mile away from all these amazing galleries, the openings are like during my daughter's bedtime and she needs me.
Exactly. See, that was what happened with me too. And so Ivan told me years ago, he goes, listen, your work is not for everybody. It's a very select kind of audience that's going to like this stuff. My advice to you is go to every opening, talk to everybody, and that's how people are going to get to know you. But I was in the same exact spot. I had a young child. I was the only parent. I couldn't do that. So that definitely was not it wasn't a good thing for my career. It really, schmoozing with people is important, but I never had time to. And it's not really my strength. I'm really good at working in the studio and I'm good at a lot of stuff, but once I started knowing more people, then I felt okay doing that. But to walk into a room full of strangers was always pretty hard for me. And, it took almost 20 years of living in New York for me to feel like I was comfortable in the art world there, because then I always knew somebody, in that room after that amount of time. But, I was in the same spot. I had a young child. I couldn't go out to those things. And it honestly wasn't that good for my work, and my work was good, but, I just didn't know enough people.
Yeah, I had started before everything kind of shut down. I had started trying to, I'm like, I can't go to the opening, but if it opens on a Friday night, I can usually like take my daughter with me on like Saturday afternoon and go look at the work and maybe try to talk to, the gallerist or the attendant who's there.
Yeah. That's the thing. It took me a long time to just not be afraid to talk to those people. But after a while, I thought, okay, look, for one thing, the attendant is like somebody who just got out of college or something. They need a job too, but I have to say, moving here, like everything is so much smaller. It's so much easier. I moved to my town. I didn't know anyone, the little place that I live now. I heard contacts. I didn't know anybody, but I had the Roswell Artist in Residence grant many years ago, and that was really fantastic grant in southeastern New Mexico. So that was like my New Mexico connection. So I went there to stay when I didn't know where I was going to live. And anyway, the guy there, the director right now, gave me he goes, well, you might want to check out this place, a little town in the mountains with a bunch of artists live there. So he gave me some connections. Anyhow, I went there looking around for trying to find a place to live. And I talked to some of his connections. The one woman is wonderful, has a gallery down the road from me, and she's a transplanted New Yorker from a long time ago. And she said, well, Albuquerque, you can check out this place, or this place. So I go up to the one gallery that she recommended, and the guy was very friendly. And I said, hi, I'm Judy Richardson. I've recently moved from New York, and I'm a sculptor. And he goes, oh, I'd love to see your work. I'm like, whoa. And I go, well, I have some things in the back of the car. Do you want to look at them? He goes, yeah, sure, bring them in. I'm like, oh my God. So I bring in, this would never happen in New York in a million years. So I bring the work in. Oh, I love this stuff. Great. So his place is called Exhibit 208, and his name is Kim Arthen, and I'm showing my work with him. Now, he's just a really friendly, wonderful guy. He's running the place with his wife, retired high school principal, right? So she's extremely organized, and they have a brewery next door and a beautiful outdoor space in the back, so people can still go there even now, because you can be separate from other people and have your drink and just hang out. So it's taken me years to build up the confidence to just talk to these gallery people, but they will talk to you. Even in New York, if you can, even little by little, if you start showing up at, little by little, like you said, even if it's on a Saturday afternoon, even if you have your child with you, it doesn't matter. If you start showing up and paying attention to their work and asking some questions or making some comments, they will start to recognize you. And then if you come with your work, they will be much more willing to give you a chance to just look at it. And, it depends. For people just starting out, you got to start out at some smaller alternative spaces. And then, those big gallery people will come and look at work in those places. They will. I sold work years ago I was showing my work at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art rental gallery in Fort Mason. I wound up selling work to a big time collector, Rene DeRosa in Napa. He came and bought work out of there. So you just never know. You got to start out where people are willing to look at your work, and then it can go up from there.
Yeah. And I feel like you're getting at this relationship building. That's something I feel like I talk a lot about with students, but it's true with anybody, that you have to.
Totally is true. Of course it is. That's how the world works. It's like, how it is. You have a friend, if somebody asks you, well, you recommend your friend. Of course you do.
The ones that come to mind are the names that come to mind. The images that come to mind are those that you know.
Of course. And that's the way the world works. So, and then things are then more friendly and more fun. You just got to get over the, anyway, it's something it doesn't happen by magic. It happens by little. You start to feel more comfortable with them, and they start to feel more comfortable with you. That's kind of how it goes.
Yeah. And I'm seeing maybe even more opportunity in some ways with the pandemic and more things being online where, there's all these online spaces popping up, but there's also all of the in-person spaces are adding like online components. So I feel like it's easier for me and for maybe other people that have young children or that just have other limitations to be able to, like I can put my daughter to bed and then go attend a Zoom opening event.
Right. Yeah. I've been in a bunch of online exhibits since the shutdown has happened. And one was such a wonderful experience because it was a good friend of mine, a lifelong friend from the Bay Area, organized a show of political art, Politics Holding the Line was the name of it. And it was a political show before this election, right, last year, of mainly Bay Area artists. But these were artists who were like lifelong political artists in San Francisco, some of the people who did the original murals in the Mission and posters, and people who've dedicated their whole lives to this endeavor of making political work. And then so the opening on Zoom was like, oh my God, these are like these people. Just getting to talk with them at the opening is like I was like, wow, these are these, famous, amazing people who have been so dedicated to this cause their entire careers as artists. And there they were on the same Zoom meeting, the same Zoom opening that I was in for this show. It was so great.
Yeah,
So
amazing.
that's a way, that might be like you're saying, it might be easier to do that than to be in a room with them. It's like, "Oh, I don't know if
Mhm.
I should talk to them," but, there they were on the screen right with me.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely I still feel nervous even, at these interviews, I'm nervous,
Yeah.
but it's a little easier.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that getting over that is very important. I mean, most artists that I know would just rather be in their studios working. And
Mhm.
I did have some people. I was in graduate school in New York City at School of Visual Arts, and I have to say there were a few people in there who I didn't really like their work that much, but man, were they ever good at the PR component? I
Mm.
mean, like seriously good at getting their work out and getting it shown and getting on the talk shows and all. I mean, I'm serious, like some heavy, heavy stuff. That was sort of like, I thought maybe that's their art, is that's where their talent is,
Right.
really up front in a very public way with stuff. And I felt like they were two separate things. When I first got to New York, I met some artists who were so friendly and generous with their time. I wound up being studio mates with two people like that, Jude Talashe, Matt Friedman, just fantastic, very just gracious, and I thought, okay, this is a way that you can be. You don't have to be some snotty, snobby kind of person to be good at your work and be out in the art world. You can be somebody who's friendly and helpful, and that's the way. And a lot of artists are
Mhm.
like that, and that's the way to meet other people and to be part of the community. So that
Mhm.
was meeting people like them really had a big impact on me.
Yeah, that makes such a difference to have those. I feel like I'm getting better and better at kind of putting myself out there and making those connections
Of
and
course, people will like you, and you'll like them, and then that's how
yeah.
and then that's who will somebody is curating a show, of course they're gonna invite you. Or, somebody asks you, "Do you know anybody who makes work like this?" And that's how
Mhm.
it works.
Yeah.
I became friendly years back with a curator in New York who's now been a longtime friend, Karen Shaw, who was the curator of the Islip Carriage House out in Long
Mm.
Island. And then, she wound up knowing everybody. And then she put me in all kinds of shows and recommended me
Mm.
for, different connections with other people. So sometimes it's just like there's a few people you can meet who become very instrumental in that way. And, you like them. You're not just friends with them because you have to be. You really are friends with them. And you like hanging out with them, and you like the work they do, like the work they're choosing for shows, and then it's just more of a natural thing than some forced kind of like, oh, I don't know,
Yeah.
those people become your friends, and then it just makes things a little easier.
Yeah, and it just takes having that first conversation or, now maybe that means sending that first message and being nervous but kind of getting through it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I would love to throw you just some kind of fun wrapping up questions. One, very broad. What are you curious about right now?
Oh, well, I'm very curious about how the world is going to be once it
Mm,
gets to be safe again, because I think it's gonna be like the Roaring '20s, just a
mm,
guess. But I didn't really ever understand that that's what the Roaring '20s were,
mm.
right? Because the Roaring '20s were after the 1918 pandemic. I never understood that because I never learned anything about the pandemic in school or
Ah,
anything. But I think it's gonna be like this huge resurgence of every kind of creativity, because I don't know about you, but I've been doing a ton of work in the studio I mean, sure, it's great I have more time because I'm not working so much, but just to be I don't get these people who say, "Oh, I feel so stressed and I can't make any work." This is a great time to make work. This
mm,
is the time, so I think there's gonna be a huge, huge, huge wave of all these people who've been like composing music and writing poetry and prose and making artwork is going to be like this, like let the floodgates open. So I'm really curious
mm.
to see how all that's going to play out, because I think it's going to be an explosion of stuff coming out after this.
Yeah, I can see that too. And even, it makes me think of all the sort of parties and just everybody coming together after this.
Oh, yes, there's gonna be such a craving for that.
Mhm.
So I'm really curious to see how that's gonna go, how that all is I think it's gonna be wonderful.
Mm. Yeah. And then fun question, what is your favorite food?
Peanuts.
Ooh.
I'm a bike rider, I still ride my bike everywhere, and
Uh,
that's my energy food. I buy the peanut butter stock, the stuff they grind up to make peanut butter, really
mhm.
good. And I just, without them, I couldn't get through my day, like that's how I have my energy.
Yeah. Do you do them like roasted or salted or just really sort of simple?
I buy that peanut butter stock, which is already roasted. It doesn't have anything, no processed, nothing, no chemicals, nothing, just, just a handful of them. And I can just keep going. I can work I have a lot of physical energy, and that's why I guess why I'm a sculptor, and I can work until like late at night. And so, yeah, that's what keeps me going.
Yeah. Oh, and that just reminded me that, thinking about the energy, and I saw on your resume, you talked a little bit about being a welder, but, just looking at the resume and the dates on there, that you were a park ranger and then a welder in the 70s. And I'm curious how that was.
I was a welder at that scenery shop I was telling you about. And I was such a bad carpenter, but I was such a good welder that that was my only salvation. Was like, I kind of saved, they were doing Fledermaus with, there's a jail scene, and like whoever they had before burned the bars of they had to have bars across the windows, and they didn't know what they were doing. So they burned them all, and I came in and fixed it. So that was, I learned how to weld in Kansas City, and it's been a very, very handy skill to have. And then, my connection to the Southwest where I am now is because I had a gig at Bryce Canyon when I was in college. I did a season there, and then I did a season at Wupatki National Monument, which is the ancient Anasazi ruins in a park that's about 40 miles northeast of Flagstaff, right below the Painted Desert. And I gave tours of those ruins, and that had a really, really huge effect on me and my work, and it was a wonderful job. So I've done a lot of exploring of the Southwest, especially during those times, and here I'm back again to do it again. So I really love this part of the country, and I feel extremely lucky to be here.
Yeah. And now do you get out to those parks?
Not those specific parks, but I mean, I live in a place I live right by gigantic forest and lots of open public land, and have been every week. That's part of what I love about living here. I'm in my studio, I'm teaching my college class, and I'm with a farmer. So I'm like part farmer now. And the rest of the time just cruising out into the arroyos and mesas and the mountains. And it's a very inspirational to me, and it has a huge impact on my mental state and on my art making. And I just need that open space and the rocks. And I swear I maybe should have been a geologist. It's just, there's so much great stuff here.
Yeah. But I love that, how I feel like most artists have that. There's something else, like, you'll say, I should have been a biologist, or I should have been a geologist, or, whatever that like interest is that kind of keeps you going.
Totally. And, when I worked for the Park Service, one of the best things about it, I lived at the park. So that was one of the greatest things, because you're already there. But in the Park Service, so you're working with historians, biologists, botanists, geologists, all these people who have their specialty, and those people know the best places to go hiking. They know the best places to recommend, way out there places, because they're not going to send you to another national park. They're going to send you out to some wilderness area where there's some amazing springs or waterfalls or ruins or cliff dwellings that nobody knows about, and is like really a great resource.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then before we kind of wrap up, is there anyone that you would want to thank or give like a shout out to?
Oh my gosh. So many people have been helpful to me. A lot of them are not alive anymore. I guess, I had 3 different older men who were some of my greatest supporters and the most help to me. And none of them, they all had something kind of in common with each other, kind of a little bit wise-assness, and they're all gone. And it was Rene DeRosa, who was the collector from Napa, California. I have work at his, it's a public sculpture garden now, and he was wonderful to me. And Ivan Karp, of course, the gallerist I told you about, who showed my work for years at his gallery OK Harris in Soho. He was one of the pioneers of Soho. And then Don Anderson just passed away this past year, and he was the patron of the Roswell Artist in Residence grant, who paid for that grant for over 50 years and supported artists. He paid you could live there. I lived there for a year, and they paid for everything I did and my family so that I could work in my studio for a year and just do that. And that was one of the most valuable. And I'm still very close friends with his wife, Sally Majette Anderson, and the people, my friends in Roswell, who are Nancy Fleming, director of the Anderson Museum, where I've got work, and the people running the Artist in Residence Grant still, Larry Bob Phillips, who recommended Magdalena to me, where I live now, and just, a bunch of great people who pushed me up and out of my, pushed me forward.
Yeah.
So all of those people and just all the people that I'm friends with in New York and here in New Mexico have been so helpful to me.
Amazing.
So, thanks, everybody.
Yes. And last thing, where can listeners connect with you online?
So my website is, are you going to post the website, or do you want me to?
Yes, I will link to it, but you can say it as well.
Okay, that's www.judyrichardsonsculpture.com. And I believe there's a contact for me on there. So hit me up on there if you like. I'm on Instagram a lot at Judy Studio, JUDYSTUDIO, Judy Studio. That's my handle on Instagram. And I love Instagram for sharing my work with other people. And I love that they're sharing theirs with me. So that's a good place to hit me up too.
Yeah, amazing. Yes. So I will link to both of those. And thank you so much. I feel like it was really so much helpful advice and just so great to hear sort of your story and all the experience that you have to share.
Oh, I hope so. And thank you, Rebecca. And anybody who needs advice, I have done a lot of stuff. And if you need any advice about projects, oh man, yes, I will be happy to help you. I've done every kind of project with kids. So if you need any advice about how to do it, what kind of materials, how it went, I'm really happy to share that, because I'm like Project Central over here. So.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for listening. As always, you can reach me at Teaching Artist Podcast on Instagram or teachingartistpodcast@gmail.com. Who do you want to hear from? Please share your recommendations of teaching artists. And if you loved this episode, please subscribe, leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow me. It really makes a big difference. Thank you.